This is a video showing the ability of the user-entered data within SPARKvue 2.6 and beyond. I've previously created a display that has a table on the left-hand side and a graph on the right-hand side. I've assigned the volume as a user-entered data set. On the right-hand side of the table, I have a pressure that is going to be read from my pressure sensor. On the right-hand side, I have generated a graph that has pressure as the vertical axis and the volume as the horizontal axis. So I have a 60 milliliter syringe that I have attached to my pressure sensor. So I'm going to sample this at 2 milliliter increments, and we'll go ahead and continue data entry here. To activate data entry, I simply need to double click and then hit enter on my keyboard to advance to the next cell. Once I've put in those volume data, I can now go down and start my data collection. I've previously changed the sampling type within this workbook page to manual sampling so that it will only keep the data when I ask it to. So I've got my syringe set to 60 milliliters here, and I'm ready to start collecting data. So I'll go ahead and press the start button on the lower left-hand side. And you can see at the top of this second column here that I have the monitored data that is the same color as the run, and you can see it's changing dynamically. When I've got my syringe set to the volume that I want to take my data point at, I can either press the check box that's next to the data on the right-hand side here, or I can select it down at the bottom. So once I've got my syringe set, I'll go ahead and click on the checkbox, and it advances to the next cell. I'm going to then change the volume of my syringe to the correct value and click on the checkbox again, and continue doing this until I have the data sets that I need. Okay, so I've completed my data, and I can see from my graph something has gone seriously wrong here. So what I can do is I can check on my volume column to see if I have made any errors. If I look at the values here, I can see that they're increasing here, and then suddenly this increases. So if I look down my column here, I can see on line 6 I've made an error. Instead of putting in a volume of 50 milliliters, I put it in 60. So to correct that, I can double click, and I can change this value to 50. You can see that that value has now changed, and I'm getting more continuous values here. Also, if I look at the tail end of my data here, I'm getting a flat portion of my curve here. That doesn't seem quite right. If I look at my last two data points here, I can see that my pressure for my 40 milliliter volume and my 42 milliliter volume are the same. So one thing that I can do is, I think the value that was wrong was my value for 42. If I kind of extrapolate this along here, I can see that this is probably the data point that's not quite right. So not only am I able to correct the user entered data portion of this, while I'm still collecting data, I can select the data point that I need to recollect data for. If I double click on that line, you can see that I now have the option of re-entering that data point from the sensor. So using my syringe, I'm now going to correctly set this for 42 milliliters. Once I've gotten to that volume, I'll go ahead and click on the checkbox. And my data point is now more in line with the other data points. Once I've double-checked to make sure that all of my data is fitting in the trend and that I have collected my data correctly, and I've entered in my data correctly, then I can press the stop button. That last data point that was down here was only a monitored data point, and it goes away. as it's no longer being monitored. So now I have my clean data that has been corrected for both an error that I put in for the initial volume and also for an incorrectly sampled data point that I was able to sample again at the correct conditions.